I almost feel sorry for Keir Starmer. Well, they're not quite. I mean, he stands in Parliament today and said, "We're united." Oh dear. He obviously doesn't know the word either. He doesn't know what the word united means. Sad. It's sad for us because obviously he's running the country and completely running it into the ground. He's surrounded by a whole load of women and David Lammy, and they're all sitting there looking very glum on the front bench. Well, of course they are. I suspect they're all sitting there thinking, I wonder if I could be leader. None of them are capable. It's a worry. I wish they'd realise how hopeless they are and say, okay, let's go for a general election and get somebody else in, because quite frankly, nobody could be, well, I say that, nobody could be worse. The Greens obviously are, a sandwich short of a picnic, to be honest with you. Some of the things they're coming up with. But in the meantime, we'll watch Starmer and watch him say nothing's wrong, nobody's going to attack me, and if they do, I'll fight back. And they'll attack him and he'll lose because he is so useless. Buy a box of popcorn and watch, because that's all I'm afraid we can do. Would that we could call a general election, but we can't.
Susan Hall's remarks about Keir Starmer reveal far more about the current political climate than about Starmer himself. Her criticism leans heavily on personal ridicule, questioning his competence, mocking his language, and portraying his front bench as demoralized, because this style of attack has become a defining feature of opposition rhetoric in the post-Brexit era. Rather than engaging with policy differences or Labour's governing record, Hall frames Starmer as a symbol of national decline, suggesting that he is running the country into the ground and surrounded by a leadership team she deems incapable. This is not a policy critique, but a narrative strategy. Paint Labour as divided, hopeless, and unfit, even when concrete evidence is limited. Her reference to the Greens and her theatrical call for popcorn reinforces how she wants the public to view politics. As spectacle, not substance. It is a tactic designed to delegitimize the government through mockery rather than argument. At the same time, her insistence that a general election is the only solution positions her comments within a broader conservative frustration. After years in opposition and internal turmoil, they are eager to frame Labour's early governing period as a failure before Starmer has had the chance to consolidate power. Ultimately, Hall's comments are less an evaluation of Starmer's actual leadership and more an attempt to energize a political base through emotional appeal. They demonstrate how partisan discourse increasingly relies on exaggeration and personal attack to define the narrative, reflecting deeper divisions within British politics and the ongoing struggle over which story about the country's direction will prevail.
Now look, I have spoken to military personnel about the threat of China. We have seen this played out on the front pages. Of course, the government are having questions around the collapse of the spy scandal. Chinese takeaway stuff may seem far-fetched, but China is not unknown for running back operations in some of these takeaways. They've been at least accosted in some countries for it.
Thank you for having me. So just to begin to provide a bit of context, this story is primarily based on a report and follow-up report by an organisation called Safeguard Defenders, where they look at overseas police stations. So essentially the key takeaways from that report were that Safeguard Defenders were able to document dozens of overseas, quote-unquote, overseas service stations or operations by Chinese public security bureaus abroad used to monitor, intimidate or coerce individuals into returning to China. Additionally, within this report, it essentially warned of a pattern of embedding in civilian commerce and diaspora communities to gather intelligence and exert influence abroad. So really, in terms of how worried we should be and how hyperbolic this may sound, it's important to understand how such restaurant clusters may align with broader patterns of activity by the Ministry of State Security, by the Chinese Ministry of State Security. So essentially, if you are restaurants located immediately outside or near military bases, you sit within normal civilian life, and therefore you can quietly gather what some intelligence professionals call pattern of life data. So this type of passive surveillance is highly valuable. And at the same time, such restaurants are in relaxed everyday settings where you can build relationships, pick up vulnerabilities, and extract intelligence through casual conversations rather than overt spying. So this fits neatly into sort of the United Front influence strategy or soft influence strategy. So in short, that distance, seems, while it can seem quite hyperbolic, when you're actually looking at it, it can be far more compromising.
Indeed. And Jay, I've spoken to Hong Kongers who've come here, of course, as part of our deal to allow them into the country to flee oppressive regime in China. Should British citizens be worried? Not just, takeaways is one thing, but then, of course, the influence of the CCP in our broader societies. We're not the only country suffering with this, by the way. We've also got this breaking news this evening that we're now getting weapons from China as well. We've seen how well that's gone with our infrastructure. Is there a worrying relationship between any government, whether it's Conservative or Labour, about our relationship with China?
Yeah, and so just to underscore, and I think this is really important, we do that when we're talking about the topic of these restaurants, we must emphasise the importance of not slipping into blanket suspicion of diaspora businesses. The fact that a restaurant is Chinese owned does not automatically mean, of course, that it is part of a state intelligence operation. And we must, avoid this Red Scare narrative that unfairly targets ordinary Chinese communities, whilst we recognise that there is a real risk that the state may exploit such commercial cover. So in terms of our general worry, and is that warranted? I mean, look, our own Director General of the MI5, Ken McCullum, himself used the words most game-changing challenge when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, and it is well acknowledged amongst different levels of society in and out of government that China poses a significant and sustained threat to UK interests. So when we're hearing these stories and we hear the news regarding close ties between British industries, whether that's sovereign capabilities such as British Steel or our military complex and Chinese industrial military complexes, it really does beg the question here, which is essentially, what are our vulnerabilities? And how easily are we willing to look at this as an oversight or say, actually, it's a strategic vulnerability. We have some potential intelligence exposure, we have hidden dependencies, and it questions our own supply chain integrity. And in an era where we know and understand the way the Chinese state are operating, why are we still allowing ourselves to fall into these patterns? Now, that comes on to two things. One, we don't understand the Chinese state as well as we think we do. And that's at the heart of government, no matter which governments of all colours, of all political backgrounds. And so really, the key ask here would be two things. One, essentially, we need to develop a realistic understanding of what China wants, what they're willing to do in order to get there. Unfortunately, the promised and long way to China audit, which would have been a great opportunity for us to do that in, did not deliver. And secondly, China is still not in the enhanced tier of the foreign influence registration scheme. Without China being in this enhanced tier, we expose innocent Chinese diaspora to suspicion when we need to be going after those who are guilty and providing ourselves with the opportunity to do that. And so really, my question would be, okay, we've got these vulnerabilities, but here are two asks. These are two things we should be delivering on, and why aren't we doing that?
Jay, thank you so much for joining me. Jay Pathak there.